My name is Rachel Donahue. I'm 33 years old, and I'm a structural engineer, the kind of person who looks at a building everyone else calls beautiful and quietly asks where the stress is hiding. Last May, I put on a blazer I'd pressed the night before, drove 40 minutes to Waverly University, and walked into the Emerson Hall atrium for my brother's doctoral hooding ceremony. I gave my name at the check-in table. The coordinator, a young woman with a headset and a color-coded clipboard, looked at her list, looked at me, and went very still. "I'm so sorry," she said, low enough that only I could hear. "You've been moved off the family seating section this morning." I looked across the atrium. My mother was standing near the tall windows in a wine-colored blouse, a corsage already pinned to her lapel. She saw me look. She smiled. "She's not on the list," my mother said to no one in particular, just loudly enough. "She never really made time for him anyway." I had a gift under my arm, a vintage drafting compass that had lived in my father's desk for 20 years and in my apartment for the 10 years since. I set it on the gift table with the other packages. Then I turned around and walked back the way I came, heels on marble, spine straight. The way you walk when a room full of people is watching, and you're the only one who knows you paid for the building they're standing in. She thought she had cut me out cleanly. She forgot that the university has a donor registry, and my name had been on it for 4 years. By the time my brother crossed the stage to receive his doctoral hood, my mother would be standing in the hallway outside the atrium, answering questions nobody had prepared her for. What happened in that building on that Saturday afternoon, 200 guests would not fully understand. But to feel the weight of it, I have to take you back 11 years. Welcome to Peaceful Drama Stories, where quiet people finally get heard and family silence comes home. If you've ever loved someone at cost to yourself and watched someone else collect the credit, this one is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. My father was a structural engineer. He ran a small firm out of an office park in Delwood for 18 years, 2 employees, 1 drafting table, a coffee maker that ran on spite. He could look at a load-bearing wall and tell you within 10 minutes whether it would hold. He was wrong about very few things structural. He was wrong about one thing financial. He believed that if he never said the word debt out loud, it would eventually lose interest in him. He died of a heart attack at 52, in the parking lot of a hardware store, on a Thursday in early November. I was 23. My brother Adrian was 13. My mother was 50, and she had no idea. Until the following Monday, when I sat beside her at my father's desk and helped her open the mail, that the firm's credit line was 18 months past due, and the house mortgage had been restructured twice without her knowledge. She cried with her hand pressed over her mouth, the way women in our family cry, absolutely determined that no sound will escape. I sat in my father's chair and did what I always do with hard information. I organized it, separated the urgent from the merely catastrophic, made a list. My mother looked at me across the desk and said something I have spent 11 years turning over. "Adrian cannot know," she said. "He just lost his father. He is not going to lose the ground under his feet on top of it." I said I could help. I was 11 months from passing my PE license exam. Engineers earn good salaries. We could make this work. She gripped my wrist hard across the desk. "Then help. But quietly, Rachel. Some help only helps if the person receiving it doesn't know to feel ashamed of it." I was 23. My father was 10 days gone. I thought I was agreeing to protect my little brother. I was actually agreeing to disappear. I passed my professional engineering exam in March, took a position at a structural firm in Harlow, 60 miles from Delwood, and set up an automatic transfer on my first payday. 40% of my take-home, every 2 weeks, landing in my mother's account. She managed the household with it. She paid the mortgage current. She covered Adrian's school fees, his soccer registration, the laptop he needed for 9th grade, the orthodontist. All of it wore my mother's name like a uniform. That first Christmas, I drove home and sat at the table while she said grace. She thanked God for providing. Then she smiled at Adrian, at my Aunt Della, at the cousins crowding the room and said, "Your father's business insurance finally came through. We're going to be all right." There was no business insurance. There was a lapsed policy and a daughter sending 40% of her paycheck from 60 miles away. I held my fork and watched my own money get baptized under a different name, and told myself it didn't matter who got the credit, so long as Adrian kept his footing. That sentence would cost me more than the mortgage ever did. Here is what nobody tells you about invisible help. It doesn't just hide the money, it hides you. Over the years that followed, I covered Adrian's AP exam fees, his SAT prep, the deposit on his college dorm. Every dollar moved through my mother's account wearing her name. Meanwhile, the work did what demanding work does. I missed his junior year play because I was on site for an emergency structural inspection. I missed his high school graduation entirely because two engineers ahead of me on a bridge project took medical leave, and I was the senior-most licensed PE on the team. Each time I called to apologize, my absence had already arrived home before me, repackaged. I found out years later, in pieces, from Aunt Della, who has a talent for delivering damage wrapped in sympathy, that my mother had been explaining my absences with a consistent story. Rachel has her own life now. She's very career-focused. She and Adrian were never that close, honestly. She finds family gatherings a little overwhelming. I didn't know those sentences were being spoken. I just felt the temperature drop. Adrian's texts got shorter, then more formal, which is worse. A 13-year-old who trusts his big sister sends terrible jokes at midnight. A 17-year-old who has been quietly taught that his sister doesn't prioritize him sends thank you notes for birthday money and nothing else. I told myself it was distance. I told myself teenage boys pull away from everyone. But you cannot argue with a story you don't know is being written about you. That's what I need you to understand before we get to the university. I wasn't losing my brother to time. I was losing him to an author. And the author was using my money to keep the lights on in the house where she held the pen. When Adrian was accepted into the doctoral program at Waverly, I cried in my car in the parking garage, at work with the kind of pride that has nowhere to go and no one to land on. His letter came with a partial fellowship. The program covered tuition and a base stipend, but there was a gap. $8,000 a year that doctoral students were expected to cover through assistantships or family support. My mother called me the week the letter arrived, with the voice she saves for asking. Warm, a little breathless. The voice from the Monday morning we'd opened those bills together. One more thing, honey, and then we're square. I should have heard the mechanism engaging. Instead, I heard my mother needing me, and I said yes. But this time, the money couldn't move quietly. The university's graduate school required large family gifts to be registered formally. There would be paperwork. I would need to sign as donor of record. What my mother did not know. What I want to be honest about, because it is the one choice in this story I made with my eyes fully open, is that when I sat across from the gift officer and read the agreement, I added one thing. A single clause. Standard language the office had available for named gifts. The donor of record will be recognized publicly at the hooding ceremony of the sponsored candidate. Not a banner, not a speech, just my name said out loud, once in a room where it belonged. I initialed it. The agreement went into a white folder in the development office. My mother's name went on the day of contact line, at her request. So they don't bother you at work, honey. And my brother spent 4 years earning a doctorate, partly on a fellowship that bore my name, which he had no reason to look up, because he had been told, in 100 small ways, that I wasn't really paying attention. I want to be fair to my mother, and I've had time to work on fair. In Delwood, a widow with 2 kids and a failed business to quietly bury is a woman with a reputation to maintain. My mother maintained hers the way she maintains everything, with iron, and with an audience. The town watched her keep Adrian in honor rolls and a stable home. They wrote the story they wanted. The widow who held it together. Nobody asked what the strength ran on. Nobody in Delwood ever asks how the lights stay on. They just admire the light. Still, understanding a trap has never once sprung it. Over the 4 years Adrian was in the program, I was efficiently removed from his narrative. His lab group photos on the department website, his qualifying exam dinner, I found out from a LinkedIn post 3 weeks deep. His first peer-reviewed publication. My mother sent the family group chat a photo of the abstract with 17 exclamation points and no mention of who had funded the equipment the research ran on. She had learned my project schedule by calling to pray over my week, and family milestones landed on my heavy rotation weekends with surgical precision. 6 weeks before the hooding ceremony, an email arrived from Waverly's Office of Development. Standard donor notification. Your fellowship recipient Adrian Marsh will be hooded this May. As donor of record, you are invited to attend as a department guest. I read it 3 times, then I wrote back I will be there. That night I called my brother directly. The first time in nearly 8 months, he picked up on the 3rd ring, which told me something. We talked for 22 minutes, the longest we'd managed in years. It was careful on both sides, like 2 people who used to know the architecture of a room and weren't sure what had been renovated. He told me about his dissertation. I told him about a bridge project I was overseeing. Before we hung up, he said, "I'm glad you're coming." 4 words, no performance. But I'm fluent in subtext, and those 4 words had 11 years of quiet behind them. 2 weeks later, my mother called with the voice. She had a reason I shouldn't attend. I won't repeat it because it didn't deserve the breath it took to say. What it came down to was this: my presence would be complicated. My absence, as always, could be explained. I told her I would be at the hooding ceremony. She said she'd see me there, and the warmth drained from her voice like water from a tilted glass. The morning of the ceremony, I drove to Waverly with my father's compass on the passenger seat. I had taken it to an engraver in February. Solid brass, compass, and straight edge, the kind they stopped making when CAD software made them obsolete. My father had used it on every significant project of his career. It had scratches from 3 decades of blueprints, and a nick on the hinge where he dropped it onto concrete once and never repaired it. Because he said a perfect tool was a tool that nobody had really used. On the inside of the case, the engraver had pressed the words I'd written on a notacard. The angle matters, so does the man who holds it. I wrapped it in navy tissue paper and tied a white ribbon. I set it on the passenger seat the way I move delicate things on job sites, carefully, with intention. I drove the 40 minutes with the radio off, coaching myself like I coach crews before a difficult inspection. Stay near the edges. Be easy to be around. Don't let her choose your seat. Just show up and be steady enough that the story she's been telling about you dies of contradiction in the room. That was my whole plan. You already know how the check-in went. Live it with me slower. The atrium of Emerson Hall was bright and crowded, smelling of lilies and floor wax. I joined the line. Ahead of me, family members gave names and floated through. Then, me. Rachel Donahue. The coordinator, Kira, her lanyard said, looked at her tablet. Her finger stopped moving. She looked up, then down, then up again with the expression of someone working math that isn't resolving. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "You've been moved to general seating. The request came this morning. Family allocation has been adjusted." The line behind me paused. I felt it without turning. Then my mother was at my elbow, moving across the atrium with the unhurried calm of a woman who has rehearsed this. Behind her, Aunt Della studied the floor. "She's not on the family list," my mother said, her voice angled at the middle distance, loud enough for the room. "She hasn't been part of his journey. It didn't feel right to take a family seat." I looked at her. 11 years of transfers, of lost weekends, of a doctoral fellowship carrying my name in a filing cabinet 20 feet from where we were standing, and she was performing my absence to a room full of strangers. I set the compass on the gift table. Then this is the last time I stand next to you and call it family, I said. For her only. Quietly, you should know that. And I walked back across the atrium the way I walk every job site where something has failed. Face doing nothing, spine doing everything. I made it to my car in the surface lot before the shaking started. Engineers hold steady until the structure is clear of people. The shaking comes later. I sat with the engine off and triaged the way I was trained. Is anyone in immediate danger? No. Is the situation reversible? Unknown. What is the next concrete action? My phone was in my hand before I'd finished the thought. I pulled up my supervisor's number and typed. Available site call this afternoon if needed. I stared at the words. 11 years of this. Every time the people who were supposed to hold me couldn't. I had driven towards somewhere I could be useful, because useful was the only love I knew how to arrange for myself without asking permission. My mother had spent a decade calling me absent. Here I was, proving her right on schedule. I deleted the text. Here is what I pieced together afterward, from Kira, and from Professor Harrington, and eventually from my brother himself. Kira went back to her desk with a bad feeling doing circles in her stomach. The name she'd just crossed off the seating list was sitting. She pulled up the event run sheet, and there it was. In the donor acknowledgement section, Rachel M. Donahue, donor of record, to be recognized at hooding ceremony per gift agreement. Not optional, not a courtesy. In the gift agreement, initialed, filed, and a woman named Rachel Donahue had just been shown to the door. Kira called the development office. The development office called Professor Harrington, who was Adrian's dissertation advisor and the department chair, and who was at that moment in his office straightening his regalia. He came down, read the folder, read the name, and stopped. Rachel Donahue, he said, who provided the structural review for the East Wing renovation. 2 years earlier, when the university had remodeled the east end of Emerson Hall, a woman from a Harlow engineering firm had volunteered a full structural review. 200 hours of analysis pro bono, because the department couldn't afford a private firm. Professor Harrington had met with her twice. He had tried to offer payment and she had declined. What she'd said, he told me later, had stayed with him. I'm a load-bearing member in a few structures I don't get credit for. This one I can do in the open. He had not known she was Adrian's sister. Why would he? Adrian's last name is Marsh, his father's name. Rachel kept Donahue, the name she'd built her career under. Adrian had been described, in the small casual ways these things get communicated, as a student without much family involvement, a mother who came to events, a sister who lived nearby but was largely absent. Professor Harrington stood in the hallway with the folder and 3 facts that would not sit still. Then he went looking for my brother. Adrian was in the staging area in his robes, running quiet calculations about the next 2 hours of his life. Professor Harrington pulled him aside and said 3 things. Your sister is the fellowship donor. The university made a commitment to acknowledge her today, and she was turned away at the door by your family this morning. Adrian looked at his advisor for a long moment. He had been handed for 11 years a very specific map of who his sister was. The map said, absent, career first, not really invested. He said, where is she now? My phone lit up in the parking lot with the university's main number. I answered in my work voice. This is Rachel. And my brother said, don't hang up, it's me. He was calling from the department phone. Behind him, I could hear the string ensemble warming up and 200 chairs filling. Adrian. His name in my mouth like something I'd been holding carefully for a long time. Aren't you supposed to be lining up? Yes, he said. That's the problem, Rachel. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Is it true? The fellowship. The East Wing. All of it, is it true? I reached for the old reflex one last time. Today isn't the day for this. Go get hooded. We can talk after. Don't. His voice cracked down the middle. Don't manage me. That's how she did it. Every time you went quiet to smooth something over, she got to fill in the silence with whatever she wanted. Tell me the truth, please. The parking lot went quiet around me. 11 years, a mortgage kept current, a college fund, 4 years of doctoral stipend, a compass on a gift table with my handwriting inside the case. Yes, I said, all of it. I heard him exhale. Not relief exactly, but the sound a structure makes when it finally bears the real load it was designed for rather than the fiction it's been holding instead. Come back, he said. Please, I need you here. I want to be honest about the 10 minutes I sat in that car. They were the hardest of this whole story. Harder than the check-in table, harder than my mother's smile. Going back meant walking through a room that had just watched me be erased. It also meant breaking the last clear thing I'd said out loud. The last time I stand next to you and call it family. I keep my word. It is one of the few things I had left intact. And if I tell you the whole truth, staying gone would have felt clean. The version of the story where I draw the line and hold it with dignity. 60 quiet years of useful Saturdays, my reputation intact, everyone eventually sorry. I sat in that car, and I wanted that clean exit, the way you want something you know is small and wrong, but temporarily pain-free. But my father's compass was sitting on a gift table, 60 feet from my brother's staging area, and I had written something on the inside of the case. The angle matters, so does the man who holds it. I hadn't written it about a compass. I pulled out of the parking lot. I texted no one. I drove back through the campus gates with both hands on the wheel, and the particular calm that comes not from feeling nothing, but from deciding what you're doing, and doing it anyway. Kira was at the entrance when I arrived. She must have been watching for me. She held the door and said nothing about lists or real locations. She handed me a program with my name, written at the top in her own handwriting, block letters underlined. You're in the reserved section, she said. I made sure of it myself. Inside, they were all in the anteroom off the main atrium. Professor Harrington with his hands clasped, his regalia slightly off-center. My Aunt Della near the wall. My mother in her wine-colored blouse with a face I hadn't seen before. Not the church smile, not the warm voice. Just a face, tired and braced. And Adrian, in his doctoral robes, holding the navy tissue package from the gift table, the ribbon still tied, the compass case open in his other hand. He had read the engraving. We looked at each other for what felt like a full minute. Hi, he said. Hi, I said. Not adequate for 11 years. Completely adequate for the next 30 seconds. Professor Harrington cleared his throat. I'd like to make a public statement on behalf of the department, before the ceremony. No, I said. He looked at me. The acknowledgement in the donor agreement, my name said once, in the ceremony. That's what I asked for. Not this. I looked at my mother, still braced, waiting for the machine she'd built to run her over in public. The truth is coming, all of it. But it travels person to person. Today belongs to him. My mother closed her eyes. Adrian looked at her gently. Not unkindly. The way you look at load-bearing material that has been carrying more than its rated capacity and has finally been relieved. You'll be in the front row, Mom, he said. That's where you'll be. Then he turned to me and held up the open compass case. Walk out there with me. When they call my name, I want you to hood me. They let a family member assist the advisor. I want it to be you. My mother made a sound, half a syllable of protest. Then she looked at her son's face and understood that this vote had already been taken without her. Adrian went to straighten his collar. My mother and I stood alone near the window for about 15 seconds. She looked old in a way I hadn't registered before. When she spoke, there was nothing in her voice I recognized. No warmth performance, no razor underneath. I didn't know how to let my own child carry me, she said. I made you invisible because I couldn't be visible, and still need you. I don't know how to explain that. I know, I said. That's the first honest sentence you've said to me in years. She flinched. I use the voice I use on job sites when I have to deliver structural findings that nobody wants to hear. Clear, complete, not cruel. Here's what happens now. You tell Adrian everything, every dollar, every invitation that didn't reach me, every story you gave him to explain my absence. You tell him before Christmas, or I will. Once plainly, and never again, that's the whole boundary. There's no punishment in it, it's just the foundation. You cannot build anything honest on what's underneath us right now. She nodded barely, eyes on the window. A nod isn't a promise, but I have been an engineer long enough to know that sometimes you let the initial set happen before you test the load. I let the nod be enough for one day. There was no hug. Anyone who tells you healing starts with a hug has never watched a fracture actually close. It starts with removing the damaged material. That had just happened. Professor Harrington put his head in the door frame. Whenever you're ready. Adrian offered me his arm. We walked out into the atrium. 200 people in folding chairs turned when the processional music changed. I was still in the blazer I'd pressed the night before, walking beside my brother in his doctoral robes, and every person in that room had heard, through seating arrangements and careful family management, that Adrian's sister wasn't really in the picture. Nobody made an announcement, nobody read a correction. There was just this: a woman with work-calloused hands and good posture, and her brother in doctoral robes, with a scratched brass compass clipped to his lapel where a buttonniere might have been, catching the light from the tall windows. When his name was called, he walked to the stage. I stood at the foot of the steps. Professor Harrington, at the top, looked down and stepped aside. He gestured me up with a small nod, the way one professional signals another. You've got this. I placed the doctoral hood over my brother's shoulders. That is what it is, physically. A specific piece of fabric, lined in the colors of the field, placed on the candidate's shoulders by the people who helped them get there. I have calculated the load capacity of structures that hold up hospitals and bridges, and the buildings where people start their lives over. I have stood in wind and rain doing math that determines whether walls can bear what they're being asked to carry. This was the best work I ever did with my hands. The room applauded. My mother, in the front row, had her palms pressed flat together and her face turned slightly toward the window. Whether she was proud or ashamed or something compound that doesn't have a name in English, I can't say. I'm an engineer, not a psychologist. I only know the weight in that room was different than it had been an hour before. The reception afterward, I'll keep short, because the best parts were small. Adrian found me near the windows, still in his robes, compass in his hand. We stood together without saying much, which was the most comfortable we'd been in a decade. Before his cohort pulled him toward photos, he said, "Sunday nights, 7 o'clock, just to talk." We have not missed one since. My mother left before the reception was half over. Delwood will read it as a mother overcome by emotion. I read it as a woman going home to sit with an honest accounting for the first time. Before Christmas, she beat the deadline by 6 days, which is exactly how my mother does things. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment. Handwritten pages. The mortgage. The insurance that never existed. The fellowship. The invitations she had redirected over 11 years. The story she had built and maintained. Every dollar named. Every absence accounted for. At the bottom of the last page, in different ink added after. You were never absent. I made you invisible because visible help would have made me something I didn't know how to be yet. I don't have a word for what I owe you. I'm not sure one exists. It isn't an apology, exactly. It's a structural assessment. And I'm a professional. I know what it costs some people to stand still long enough to let someone read the damage in them. I haven't been back to Delwood yet, but when she calls now, on ordinary evenings, about unremarkable things, I answer. Some structures you reinforce one true sentence at a time. We are, sentence by sentence, two women who no longer lie to each other. That's not a fairy tale, it's better, it's load-bearing. Last month, Adrian mailed me a photograph from the ceremony. Not the stage, not the hood. It's the gift table early morning before any of it happened. Some arriving guest's incidental photo that caught a compass and navy tissue paper sitting patient and precise among other people's gifts, waiting. On the back, in my brother's handwriting. I should have looked for this a long time ago. It hangs by my desk now, next to my PE license, and I touch the frame some mornings before the first call of the day. My father knew what he was teaching me when he handed me that compass at age 9 and said the angle was the whole thing. That 1 degree off at the origin becomes a mile off at the end. He was right. He was just talking about more than drafting. If you carry one thing out of this story, carry this. Invisible support isn't humility. It's a foundation with no one's name on it. And a foundation with no name on it is a foundation anyone can claim. Put your name on what you built. Say the true thing plainly, without a weapon in it, while the people you love can still hear you. One name on a donor registry. One clause in an agreement. One drive back across a parking lot I almost didn't make. It turns out that's all the angle you need.